Ancient builders across the globe shared a secret code hidden in plain sight. This video will reveal the astonishing evidence of a universal measuring system that connected distant civilizations. How did the pyramid engineers of Egypt and the stone circle builders of Britain use the same mathematical rules without ever meeting? You will discover how these forgotten units of measure encode advanced knowledge of our planet and the stars. By the end, you will see the ancient world not as a collection of isolated cultures, but as a single, interconnected network of brilliant minds. What does it say about human history that our earliest monuments whisper the same numbers across thousands of miles? A master builder in ancient Egypt surveys the desert plateau. His Royal Cubit rod the key to unlocking the geometry of the Great Pyramid. At nearly the same moment in history, an ocean and a continent away, an unknown engineer in the high Andes uses a stone measuring tool of almost identical length to construct the colossal, interlocking walls of Sacsayhuaman. These two cultures, separated by a seemingly impassable world, were building with the same invisible ruler. This is the foundation of our global mystery, and it defies every conventional explanation of history. We are not looking at crude similarities, like two people independently inventing the wheel. This is the precise recurrence of complex mathematical ratios and sophisticated geometric principles embedded into the very bones of their greatest structures. The units of measure found in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the British Isles, and the Americas are not just close, they are often identical to within a fraction of a millimeter. How can this be? This pattern is too exact, too widespread to be a series of cosmic coincidences. It points to something far more profound than parallel development. It suggests a shared and perhaps even an inherited knowledge system. So if these builders were all using the same secret code, the same fundamental units of length, we are forced to ask a single, burning question. Where did this universal standard come from in the first place? The mystery of a shared global standard finds its first compelling evidence not in Egypt, but in the rolling green hills and misty moors of Britain. Here in the 20th century, an Oxford engineering professor named Alexander Thom made a discovery that would shake the foundations of archaeology. After meticulously surveying hundreds of ancient stone circles, from the colossal rings of Avebury to the stark, dramatic stones of Callanish in Scotland, Thom identified a pattern so consistent it defied chance. The builders were using a precise unit of measurement, one he named the megalithic yard. This unit was not a rough approximation. It was a remarkably consistent length of approximately 2.72 feet, appearing again and again in the diameters and perimeters of these sacred sites. Thom's statistical analysis revealed a level of precision that could only come from a standardized measuring rod, a physical tool carried from one building project to the next across vast distances. Think about what this means for our picture of Neolithic Europe. These were not isolated groups of primitive farmers haphazardly stacking stones. A shared unit of measure implies a shared culture of builders, a guild of engineers who possessed and applied a common body of knowledge. How did this precise standard spread from the Orkney Islands off the northern coast of Scotland all the way to the stone rows of Brittany in France? We are looking at a network, a communication of ideas across a continent in an era we often assume was defined by isolation. The existence of the megalithic yard forces a complete reconsideration of the technological and social capabilities of our ancestors. It suggests a level of organization, of sophisticated planning and shared purpose that we are only just beginning to appreciate. While Alexander Thom was uncovering the megalithic yard in Britain, The most famous ancient standard was already waiting in the sands of Egypt. The Royal Cubit was the sacred backbone of pharaonic engineering, a unit of about 20.6 inches that governed the construction of every temple and pyramid along the Nile. This was not a rough guideline scratched in the dirt. It was a precise physical object, a cubit rod made of wood or stone, often divided into 7 palms and 28 digits, that was the absolute standard for master builders. With this rod, the architects of the Great Pyramid achieved a level of precision that remains breathtaking. The sides of the pyramid's base are virtually identical in length, varying by less than 2 inches across a distance longer than 2 football fields. This was accuracy on a scale we would struggle to match even with modern laser equipment. But the true genius of the Royal Cubit is revealed not just in the straightness of the lines, but in the numbers that emerge from the finished structure. The base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, when measured in royal cubits, is a very deliberate number. It works out to precisely 1,760 cubits. Why is that number significant? If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by the same value, you get a number that represents the radius of the Earth. The builders were encoding a fundamental proportion of our planet into their monument. This is not a vague symbolic gesture. It is a precise mathematical statement, a demonstration of geodetic knowledge that seems to belong to a much later age. The Royal Cubit itself appears to be derived from the Earth's polar circumference, with 1/10,000,000th of that distance equaling a length remarkably close to the cubit. So this sacred Egyptian ruler was far more than a tool for measuring stone blocks. It was a fundamental part of an integrated system, a single piece of a grand puzzle that connected mathematics, astronomy, and the very dimensions of the world. The sophistication of this system is so profound that it forces us to wonder, did the pyramid builders develop this advanced knowledge entirely on their own, in glorious isolation along the Nile? Or were they the brilliant inheritors and perfecters of a much older and truly global tradition of wisdom? When you place the megalithic yard and the Royal Cubit side by side, a stunning pattern emerges. The megalithic yard at 2.72 feet and the Royal Cubit at 1.72 feet are not just random lengths. Their ratio is a direct expression of fundamental mathematical constants. Divide the megalithic yard by the Royal Cubit, and you get a number incredibly close to 1.618, the famous golden ratio. Multiply them together, and the result circles back to a value intimately related to pi. This is not a vague numerical coincidence. It is the signature of a shared design philosophy. Both of these iconic measuring sticks appear to be different expressions of the same core geometric principle. Imagine a single circle. From its circumference you can derive one unit. From its radius or from a pentagon inscribed within it, you can derive the other. They are two sides of the same mathematical coin. This relationship suggests that the ancient architects were not just using measures, they were using a unified system of mathematics. The megalithic yard and the Royal Cubit are like two different languages that both tell the same story, a story of circles, spheres, and the proportions of the Earth itself. This forms the first unshakable mathematical bridge between the stone circles of Europe and the pyramids of Egypt. It is hard evidence that these distant cultures were tapping into the same wellspring of knowledge. They were not just building structures, they were encoding a universal science into the landscape. This profound connection forces a monumental question. If these two different units are mathematical siblings, what was the original source, the parent measurement from which they both sprang? This same pattern of a hidden ruler appears with stunning clarity on the other side of the world. Journey to the high plateau of central Mexico, to the abandoned metropolis of Teotihuacan. walking the immense Avenue of the Dead, flanked by the massive pyramids of the Sun and the Moon, you are treading a landscape laid out with a precision that rivals the Nile. The master builders here used their own sacred standard, a unit modern researchers call the Northern Foot, measuring approximately 1.059 meters. This unit is the fundamental key that unlocks the entire city plan. The side length of the pyramid of the Sun's base is a neat 260 northern feet. The width of the Avenue of the Dead is a specific multiple of this same unit. Every major structure is bound together by this invisible grid, a testament to a shared and rigorously enforced building code. But the mystery of the Northern Foot deepens far beyond the Valley of Mexico. This exact same unit of measure, to within a fraction of a centimeter, has been identified in the sprawling temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The central towers, the moats, the galleries, all conform to dimensions that are whole multiples of this same Northern Foot. We are now faced with a geographical impossibility. A unit of measure found in the heart of pre-Columbian America is also the foundational standard for the largest religious monument on Earth, located in Southeast Asia. Conventional history offers no trade routes, no migrating armies, no plausible line of communication that could explain this. The cultures of Mesoamerica and the Khmer Empire were separated by the entire Pacific Ocean and by thousands of years of assumed isolation. How can the same exact measuring stick appear in both places? This is not a case of similar ideas, like two cultures independently developing pyramids. This is the recurrence of a specific, arbitrary number, a precise length that had to be physically transmitted or inherited from a common source. The presence of the Northern Foot in such distant and disconnected corners of the ancient world suggests a web of knowledge so vast and so old that its very existence rewrites our understanding of humanity's past. It forces a humbling possibility that our map of the ancient world is missing entire continents of connection. The sheer impossibility of this global pattern points toward a single, astonishing source. What if these ancient measuring sticks were not arbitrary lengths, but were all born from the ultimate standard, the Earth itself? This is the Geodetic Hypothesis, the idea that our planet's own dimensions provided the master blueprint for humanity's first units of measure. Geodetics is simply the science of measuring the Earth, a field we assume was invented in the modern era. Yet the evidence carved in stone suggests our ancestors mastered its principles millennia ago. Take the Royal Cubit of Egypt, the Earth's polar circumference, the distance around the globe from pole to pole, is roughly 40 million meters. Divide that immense distance by 10 million, and you get a length of 4 meters. Now divide that 4-meter length by the mathematical constant pi, and the result is a unit of about 1.27 meters. This is almost exactly 2 royal cubits. The sacred Egyptian ruler appears to be a direct, intentional fraction of the Earth's polar radius. The builders were, in effect, carrying a tiny slice of the planet in their hands. The same profound connection exists for the megalithic yard. Scholars have found that the Earth's polar circumference can be divided by a specific, elegant number to arrive at the 2.72-foot length. One compelling calculation divides the circumference by 120 million, then multiplies by pi, yielding the megalithic yard with remarkable precision. This is not a vague coincidence. It is a deliberate, mathematical encoding of global knowledge into a portable standard. This transforms our understanding of these monuments entirely. A stone circle in Britain was not just a local calendar. It was a scale model of the world, its proportions echoing the planet's own. The Great Pyramid was not merely a pharaoh's tomb, but a permanent statement of cosmic order, built with a ruler that was itself a definition of the Earth. These builders were not just constructing buildings, they were weaving the fabric of the cosmos into their architecture, creating a permanent link between the human and the celestial. They possessed a global perspective that saw their local landscape as part of a unified, spherical whole. How could cultures we consider primitive have possibly known the size of their world with such stunning accuracy? The answer to that question may lie not on the ground, but in the motion of the heavens above. But how could a builder in Britain and an architect in Egypt both derive the same earthly measure from the planet itself? The answer hangs in the night sky, a clock visible to all. The celestial cycles of the sun, moon, and stars provided the one universal constant, a global metronome that ticked at the same rate for every culture. The solar year, the lunar month, the slow, grand wobble of the Earth's axis known as the precession of the equinoxes, these were not just times for planting or holding festivals. They were the fundamental frequencies of a cosmic engine. The genius of the ancient meteorologists was to convert this time into space, to turn the regular beat of the heavens into a fixed length on the ground. One of the most elegant methods involves the pendulum, a simple pendulum that completes one swing every single second, a direct echo of the cosmic clock, has a length of almost exactly 1 meter. But more intriguingly, variations of this principle, perhaps using a pendulum that counted a different celestial interval, could generate lengths strikingly close to the megalithic yard or the northern foot. Think of the process. A master builder could travel anywhere to any new land. By observing the stars and the sun, he could determine the exact length of the local solar day. Using this celestial timing, he could then calibrate a pendulum to swing a specific number of times, and from that motion derive a standard measuring rod. This method is entirely portable and independent of any physical artifact. It relies only on the immutable laws of physics and the shared sky above. This celestial connection was the ultimate failsafe. It meant the sacred knowledge of measurement could never be truly lost. Even if a civilization fell and its cubit rods turned to dust, the next generation of enlightened builders could simply look upward to rediscover the standard. The sky was their eternal reference library, and the movements of the stars were the instructions for rebuilding their science. This transforms the purpose of the monuments we have been examining. A stone circle was not just a place to observe the stars, it was a device calibrated by them. The pyramids were not just aligned to the stars, they were built with a ruler defined by them. The very act of construction was a ritual that bound the earth to the heavens, using measure to create a permanent, physical harmony between the human world and the cosmic order. If the earth gave them the number, it was the sky that showed them how to count. This entire global system, built on celestial cycles and planetary dimensions, was translated into stone using a surprisingly simple set of tools. The master builder's toolkit was elegant in its minimalism. A length of rope, a set of wooden stakes, a heavy stone for a plumb bob, and a container of water for leveling were all that was needed to lay out the most complex sacred geometry. The real magic was not in advanced machinery, but in the profound understanding of mathematical principles applied with these humble instruments. A knotted cord, for instance, was far more than a string. It was a portable computer. By tying knots at specific intervals, a builder could create a physical representation of a mathematical ratio. A cord with 12 equal segments could be stretched into a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units. This instantly creates a perfect right angle, a foundational principle of construction known for millennia before the Greek philosopher Pythagoras gave it his name. With just a rope and a few stakes, an entire temple complex could be squared to the cardinal directions with astonishing accuracy. The same simple cord could be anchored to a central stake and swept in a circle to create a perfect perimeter. The diameter of that circle multiplied by the constant pi would give the circumference, allowing the builder to plan the number of stones needed or to encode celestial proportions into the structure's size. This process of using a small, standard unit to generate larger, harmonious dimensions is sometimes called quantivolution. Think of it as building with a cosmic Lego brick. The master builder started with a single, sacred unit like the Royal Cubit or the Megalithic yard. This was the quantum, the indivisible base measure. To design a wall or a pyramid's base, they did not simply add these units together in a long, tedious row. They multiplied the base unit by significant whole numbers, often derived from astronomical cycles. They might multiply by 360 for the days in a year or by 28 for the lunar mansions. This multiplication by whole number ratios ensured that every part of the building remained in a harmonious mathematical relationship with every other part. The entire structure sang with a single, coherent frequency. A sighting pole used in conjunction with these chords allowed for the precise alignment of these shapes to the horizon, capturing the rising sun of the solstice or the transit of a key star. A simple pendulum swinging to the rhythm of a celestial count could verify the standard length of the measuring cord itself. The true secret, then, was not locked away in a lost technology of impossible machines. It was alive in the mind of the craftsman who knew how to see the complex within the simple. He could look at a length of rope and perceive the perfect angles and cosmic circles it contained. He understood that the universe was built on a scaffold of geometry, and with a few basic tools, he could make that invisible scaffold visible, anchoring it to the earth in stone and majesty. This practical genius bridges the gap between the vast, abstract knowledge of the Earth's size and the tangible, physical monuments we can still touch today. It shows us that the greatest mysteries were solved not with power but with profound insight. These irrational numbers form the very grammar of the ancient builders' language. Pi, phi, and the square root of 2 are not numbers you can write down neatly. They are infinite without end, representing perfect, unattainable ideals. Yet these elusive constants are physically embodied in stone across the world. The Great Pyramid is the classic example. Its base perimeter, divided by twice its original height, gives a value of pi with astounding accuracy. The pyramid's architects designed a structure where the relationship between a square base and a triangular side precisely encodes the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. This is not a vague approximation. It is a deliberate, sophisticated geometric construction. The same profound knowledge appears in the Parthenon of Greece. The footprint of this temple is a rectangle that conforms almost perfectly to the golden ratio, phi. The ratio of its length to its width is approximately 1.618. This same proportion governs the spacing of its columns and the relationship between different sections of its facade. But why this number? Look at a nautilus shell or the spiral arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. The golden ratio is the fingerprint of efficient growth, a pattern that repeats throughout the living world. By building with phi, the Greeks were not just seeking beauty, they were aligning their work with a fundamental law of nature. Then there is the square root of 2, a number born from the simple diagonal of a square. Take a square with sides of 1 unit. The diagonal crossing it will always be the square root of 2, about 1.414. This ratio is the key to doubling area, and it appears with stunning frequency in ancient floor plans. A temple designed on a square grid will naturally generate root 2 proportions in the relationships between its chambers and altars. These 3 constants often work together in a single structure. A design might start with a square generating root 2. From that, a golden rectangle can be constructed, introducing phi. That rectangle might then be used to define the proportions of a circular feature, bringing in pi. The entire building becomes a woven tapestry of these fundamental patterns. This shared use of irrational numbers is the most compelling evidence for a unified scientific tradition. Different cultures, using different local units of measure, were all employing the same invisible geometric blueprints. They were not just copying shapes, they were applying a deep philosophical understanding that the universe itself is built on a scaffold of perfect, eternal ratios. To build with these numbers was to participate in the cosmic order, to make the divine mathematics of creation visible here on Earth. This common language points to a source knowledge so profound that it transcended geography and culture, uniting the world's first architects in a single, silent conversation. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the ultimate expression of this ancient global science, a perfect case study carved in limestone. To understand it, we must perform a kind of forensic analysis, peeling back its layers not as a tomb, but as a meticulously designed repository of knowledge. Its dimensions are not arbitrary. The original base perimeter measures precisely 1,760 royal cubits. Now, consider this. If you take the length of 1/2 minute of latitude at the Earth's equator, a specific slice of our planet's circumference, it translates to a distance of just over 1,760 of these same royal cubits. The builders scaled the planet down into their monument. The pyramid's perimeter was a direct representation of 1/2 minute of the Earth's curvature. The encoding continues with its height. The pyramid's original height was 280 royal cubits. The ratio of the perimeter to the height gives us a number very close to 2 times pi. This is the mathematical trick that allows the pyramid to simultaneously model a square and a sphere. The height itself relates to the Earth's polar radius. If you take that polar radius and scale it down by the same factor of 43,200, a key precessional number, you arrive at the pyramid's intended height. So the base encodes a slice of the equator, while the height encodes a fraction of the distance to the pole. This is not just architecture, it is a scale model of a hemisphere, a perfect marriage of square and circle, of earth and sky frozen in stone. Inside the pyramid, the precision deepens. The so-called King's Chamber is a sealed vault of mathematical constants. The chamber is a perfect double cube, its length exactly twice its height and width. The diagonal of the chamber's end wall measures precisely 15 royal cubits, while the diagonal across the floor from corner to corner measures 25 royal cubits. These numbers, 15 and 25, are the legs of a 3-4-5 Pythagorean triangle, scaled up by a factor of 5. The coffer within the chamber, often mistaken for a sarcophagus, has an internal volume that corresponds to a standard of measurement known from other ancient cultures. Even the narrow, claustrophobic ascending and descending passages are not merely corridors. They are precisely angled sight tubes, aligned to key stars like Alpha Draconis and the constellation of Orion, locking celestial events into the structure's very skeleton. The Great Pyramid was never meant to house a dead pharaoh. It was designed to house an entire system of knowledge, a complete curriculum in geodetics, astronomy, and sacred mathematics. It is a stone textbook built to withstand the ages, ensuring that this universal science would never be completely lost. It stands not in isolation, but as the most perfect and enduring member of that global fraternity of builders, all of whom were speaking the same silent, numerical language. Stonehenge stands silent on the windswept Salisbury Plain, a ring of sarsen stones that holds a secret far deeper than its massive appearance suggests. This was not a crude temple for barbaric rituals. It was a precision instrument, a colossal astronomical computer built with the unerring standard of the megalithic yard. The diameter of the Great Sarsen Circle is a perfect 30 megalithic yards. The surrounding ring of 56 chalk pits, known as the Aubrey Holes, is also laid out using this same unit. This mathematical consistency reveals a master plan, a blueprint executed with the rigor of a modern engineering project. But what was this machine designed to calculate? The answer is written in the sky. The 56 Aubrey Holes were not merely decorative. They served as a primitive but brilliant predictive calculator for one of the most complex celestial events, the eclipse. The solar and lunar cycles do not match perfectly. It takes the moon 19 years to return to the same position relative to the sun and earth, a period called the Metonic cycle. 56 is a magical number in this celestial dance. It is 3 times the 19-year Metonic cycle, a number that also helps track the more subtle 18.6-year cycle of the lunar nodes, the points where the moon's path crosses the sun's, causing eclipses. By moving markers around these 56 holes in a specific pattern, the keepers of Stonehenge could track the passage of years and predict when the sun and moon would align in the dramatic, dark embrace of an eclipse. This was an act of immense foresight. It transformed a random, terrifying celestial event into a predictable phenomenon, granting its builders a form of cosmic control. The very stones themselves are aligned to capture the sun's journey. The central axis of the monument points directly to the rising sun on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. But this alignment is not a rough approximation. The specific width and placement of the stones create a precise frame, a window through which the first sliver of the solstice sun would appear. This required not only astronomical knowledge but a profound understanding of geometry and sightlines, all planned and executed using the universal language of the megalithic yard. The image of primitive, isolated tribes struggling for survival shatters against the reality of Stonehenge. This was a communal scientific endeavor of staggering ambition, a project that required generations of coordinated labor, precise record-keeping, and the transmission of complex knowledge. It proves that the builders of Northern Europe were part of that same global fraternity of minds, using a shared standard to build a permanent link between the earth and the heavens. The silent stones of these ancient sites force a difficult question upon modern science. How do we explain a pattern so precise and so widespread? This question has fractured the academic world into 2 opposing camps, a debate that goes to the very heart of how we view human history. On one side stands the theory of independent invention. This is the orthodox view, which argues that human ingenuity, when faced with universal problems, will naturally converge on similar solutions. Different cultures needing to move massive stones would all eventually discover the lever and the roller. Needing to create stable structures, they would all stumble upon the right-angled triangle. In this view, the pyramid shape is simply the most logical way to build high with stone, a form invented and reinvented across the globe. The similarities, according to this school of thought, are superficial, a testament to the universal logic of physics and the independent genius of humankind. It is a comforting idea, one that celebrates the innate cleverness of isolated cultures. But then we are confronted with the numbers. The independent invention theory can explain why 2 cultures built pyramids, but it cannot easily explain why they both used a unit of measure that embodies the golden ratio and the Earth's circumference. It struggles to account for the recurrence of the exact same arbitrary length, the Northern Foot, in the sweltering jungles of Cambodia and the high deserts of Mexico. This is where the other side of the debate raises its compelling, if controversial, voice. This is the diffusionist theory, the idea that this complex knowledge was carried from one culture to another. The evidence for diffusion lies not in the shapes of the buildings, but in the invisible mathematical code that built them. The precise correlation between the megalithic yard and the Royal Cubit is not a solution to a practical problem. It is the signature of a shared, abstract science. The odds of two cultures independently deriving units of measure that are both perfect fractions of the Earth's polar circumference and that also maintain a perfect phi relationship with each other are astronomically low. This, argue the diffusionists, is not parallel development. This is the same blueprint. So if this knowledge was diffused, how did it travel? The most plausible mechanism is maritime. We have severely underestimated the seafaring capabilities of our ancestors. Long before the Phoenicians circled Africa, master masons in sturdy, ocean-going vessels could have carried their sacred measuring rods and their geometric secrets along coastlines and across open water. These would not have been invading armies, but small guilds of enlightened builders, welcomed by local chieftains for their supernatural ability to raise monuments that harmonized with the cosmos. They were the itinerant professors of a forgotten age, exchanging knowledge for patronage. A more radical interpretation suggests that both the megalith builders and the pyramid architects were drawing from a much older and now vanished source civilization. A progenitor culture that first mapped the Earth and the stars, that first defined these perfect units, and whose legacy was carried forward by surviving disciples after its own collapse. This is, of course, the most speculative and hotly contested idea, yet it persists because it offers a single, elegant origin for a global phenomenon. The debate between independent invention and diffusion is far from settled. One side sees human history as a series of brilliant but isolated sparks. The other sees a single, spreading flame. As you stand before the silent testimony of these stones, you must ask yourself which story feels true. Does the evidence point toward countless independent geniuses, or does it whisper of a single, lost school of wisdom whose graduates shaped the ancient world? This idea of a single, lost source leads us to the most controversial and captivating theory of all. Legends of a great flood and a sunken civilization echo across the world, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the Popol Vuh of the Maya. The most famous of these is, of course, Plato's story of Atlantis. He described a powerful island kingdom, advanced in navigation and engineering, that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of cataclysm. For centuries, this was treated as a philosophical fable. But what if it was a distorted memory of a real historical event? Could a sophisticated maritime culture, flourishing at the end of the last ice age, have been the original source of the universal measuring system we see etched into pyramids and stone circles? This is the radical hypothesis put forward by researchers like Graham Hancock. He posits that a forgotten progenitor civilization, perhaps centered on now submerged coastlines, achieved a profound understanding of astronomy, geodetics, and geometry. This culture, he suggests, was largely wiped out by the rapid sea level rise that accompanied the end of the Ice Age around 12,000 years ago. The survivors of this cataclysm, scattered refugee groups, would have carried fragments of this advanced knowledge with them as they traveled the world, seeding the rebirth of civilization in places like Egypt, Peru, and Mesopotamia. This would explain the sudden appearance of sophisticated astronomy and megalithic construction at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which dates to a time when, according to conventional history, humans were only simple hunter-gatherers. The theory provides a neat, if unproven, answer to our central mystery. It offers a single point of origin for the megalithic yard, the Royal Cubit, and the Northern Foot. These were not independently invented standards, but the inherited tools of a global builders' guild whose founders were lost to the sea. The uniformity of the system stems from the fact that it was a complete, pre-packaged science, gifted to emerging cultures by the surviving master masons of the fallen world. This is without question a highly controversial idea. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it for a lack of concrete evidence, pointing out that no submerged cities from this era have been conclusively found. The hypothesis forces us to consider a staggering possibility that the timeline of human civilization is not a steady upward climb from primitivism, but a story of catastrophic rises and falls. It suggests that our own recorded history is merely the latest chapter, built upon the ruins of a forgotten golden age whose legacy survives only in the silent, mathematical language of the stones they left behind. Whether you find this theory compelling or improbable, it serves a vital purpose. It challenges the boundaries of our accepted narrative and dares us to ask if the deepest roots of human achievement lie not in the dust of known history, but beneath the waves of a forgotten ocean. Far to the east of Egypt and the megalithic circles, another great civilization was flourishing in the fertile basin of the Indus River. While the pyramids rose along the Nile, the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were thriving metropolises, laid out with a grid-like precision that would feel familiar in a modern city. Their greatest secret was not hidden in towering monuments, but in the very bricks that built their world. Every single baked mud brick, from the smallest house to the great public baths, conformed to a single, unyielding standard. The ratio of their dimensions was always 4:2:1. This was not a casual suggestion. It was a rigid, enforced building code that held true across an empire spanning over 1,000,000 square kilometers. Imagine the implication. A builder from the outskirts of the civilization could travel to the capital and know with absolute certainty that the bricks he found there would fit perfectly with his own. This was a level of organizational control and foresight that speaks of a powerful, centralized authority, one that understood the profound importance of a universal standard. This obsession with uniformity extended beyond length. The Indus Valley people developed one of the most sophisticated and consistent systems of weights the ancient world had ever seen. Their standard unit was a small, meticulously crafted stone cube. Excavations have uncovered these weights in a perfect progression, based on a consistent ratio. They used a decimal system where the smallest unit multiplied by 16 to create the next standard weight. This system was so reliable that a merchant in the port city of Lothal, on the Arabian Sea, could conduct trade with a merchant from a city hundreds of miles inland, and their stone weights would balance a transaction perfectly. They were participating in a vast, integrated economic network, all made possible by a shared language of measure. The script of the Indus Valley remains one of history's great unsolved puzzles. We cannot read a single word they wrote, yet we do not need to decipher their writing to understand a core part of their genius. Their metrological system is their true, legible text. The standardized bricks and the perfect stone weights tell us a story of a society built on logic, order, and a deep, practical understanding of mathematics. They were not just another isolated cradle of civilization. They were a third major node in a growing global network. They proved that the drive to standardize measurement, to find a universal language for trade and construction, was not a peculiarity of the West or the Middle East. It was a fundamental hallmark of advanced society, appearing independently yet identically across the world. The silent, geometric bricks of the Indus Valley shout a message that their script still keeps secret. They were part of the same grand conversation, using the same principles of order to build a stable world, adding their powerful voice to the chorus of ancient engineers who knew that to measure the world correctly was to master it. Across the vast expanse of Asia, the same pattern of cosmic order was being codified in bronze and jade. From the Shang and Zhou dynasties, archaeologists have unearthed exquisite bronze rulers, their surfaces marked with precise divisions. These were not mere tools for craftsmen, they were instruments of imperial power and cosmic harmony. The fundamental unit was the chi, a length that evolved over centuries but always maintained its role as the foundation for all construction and land measurement. With this standard chi, the Zhou dynasty laid out its capital cities according to a strict grid plan, a practice known as the well-field system that organized the entire kingdom into a geometric representation of order. The monumental tombs of the first emperor, with their terracotta armies standing in perfect formation, were planned using this same system, ensuring that even in death, the emperor's domain reflected the perfect balance of the cosmos. This drive for standardization was rooted in a deep philosophy. For the Chinese, correct measurement was a moral imperative. The units were derived from the fundamental numbers of the universe, the pitch of musical pipes that harmonized with the seasons, and the dimensions of the human body, which was itself a microcosm of heaven and earth. A building constructed with the correct measures did not just stand strong, it resonated with the Tao, the natural way of the universe. It brought human activity into alignment with celestial cycles, ensuring peace and prosperity. Here, on the other side of the world, we find a civilization that never traded with Egypt or communicated with the megalith builders, yet they arrived at the same profound conclusion. Their units of chi and the Egyptian cubit are different lengths, born from different cultural contexts, but the philosophy behind them is identical. Both cultures believed that their local ruler was a fragment of a universal constant, that to build with precision was to participate in a divine order. This is not the spread of a single idea from one source. This is something even more remarkable. It is the independent discovery by multiple brilliant cultures of a fundamental truth about reality itself. They all looked at the same stars, the same geometric principles, and the same planet, and they all independently heard the same silent music. The question then shifts from who taught whom to what is it about the universe that compels intelligent minds to build their world in its image. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the mountain air was said to carry the voice of the god Apollo, the priests of Delphi performed a ritual more precise than any trance. They were master geometers. The entire sanctuary, from the winding sacred way to the very foundation of the temple of Apollo, was not haphazardly placed upon the rugged terrain. It was a deliberate geometric composition, a sacred landscape engineered to embody the very harmony it was meant to channel. The key to this harmony was a specific rectangle, one whose proportions were considered divinely beautiful. If you were to measure the most important structures and their spacings, you would find the ratio of the longer side to the shorter side repeatedly approximating 1.618, the golden ratio. This was not an accident of construction. It was the architectural equivalent of a musical chord played to resonate with a fundamental frequency of the cosmos. The Greeks had a word for this philosophical and aesthetic ideal, this perfect balance between parts and whole. They called it Symmetria, and it was the beating heart of their entire architectural tradition. This drive for mathematical perfection in stone reached its zenith in the most famous of all Greek temples, the Parthenon, rising from the Acropolis in Athens. Its architect Iktinos did not simply design a beautiful building. He engineered a mathematical experience. The Parthenon appears to be a collection of perfect right angles and straight lines, but this is a brilliant optical illusion. Iktinos knew that perfect straight lines would appear to sag to the human eye. To counter this, he introduced subtle curves. The platform on which the temple stands bows upward almost imperceptibly in the center. The columns themselves lean inward slightly, and they bulge in the middle, a technique called entosses, all to create the perception of perfect straightness and strength. More profoundly, the entire structure is bound together by the golden ratio. The width of the Parthenon's front compared to its height forms a golden rectangle. The spacing of the columns and the relationship between different elements of the facade all conform to this same divine proportion. But what was the ruler they used to achieve this? Ectinos worked not with a single fixed unit like the Royal Cubit, but with a modular system based on the diameter of the base of a column. This column diameter became his fundamental module. Every other dimension in the building, from the space between columns to the height of the entablature, was a precise fraction or multiple of this module. This ensured that every part of the temple was in a harmonious mathematical relationship with every other part. Why go to such extraordinary lengths? The answer lies in Greek philosophy. For thinkers like Pythagoras and Plato, the universe was not a chaotic mess. It was a cosmos, an ordered system built from numbers and geometry. They believed that mathematical laws were the language of the gods, the underlying reality behind the visible world. To build a temple using these laws was to create a microcosm, a small piece of the perfect heavenly order here on earth. It was a form of philosophy in stone, a permanent argument that reality is, at its core, mathematical. This Greek pursuit of symmetria is not an isolated development. It is the clear and logical refinement of the same principles that guided the pyramid builders and the megalith engineers. The tools were different, the units of measure had changed names, but the silent conversation was the same. They were all listening to the same cosmic music, and each, in their own time and place, learned to write down the notes. Rome took this ancient obsession with measure and forged it into an instrument of pure power. Their standard was the Roman foot, the pes, a unit of about 29.6 centimeters. This was not a sacred ruler derived from the stars or the Earth's curvature, at least not in any overt way. Its power was of a different kind, born from the relentless logic of administration and the demands of a sprawling empire. The Roman foot was mass-produced, stamped out in bronze, and distributed from the central mint, the Temple of Juno Monitor, which gave us the word money and the name for their official standard, the pes monetales. This was measurement as a function of the state, a tool for taxation, for paying soldiers, and for parceling out conquered land. The genius of Rome was to take a principle that earlier cultures used to connect with the cosmos and apply it to the monumental task of governing the world. A legionary on the misty frontier of Britannia could dig a trench knowing its depth was the same as a trench dug by his comrade in the deserts of Syria. This uniformity was the empire's nervous system, allowing commands from Rome to be executed with mechanical precision thousands of miles away. Their legendary roads, arrow-straight highways that stitched the empire together, were constructed to a standard width. Their marching camps, built every night by tired soldiers, were laid out on an identical grid plan, a temporary city that could be erected anywhere in the known world. The standard Roman fort was a perfect rectangle, its dimensions a multiple of the pes, its gates and headquarters always in the same relative position. This was not just for efficiency, it was for control. A commander transferred from one end of the empire to the other could immediately understand the layout of his new fortress and deploy his troops without a moment of hesitation. The great cities they founded, from London to Cologne, were all built on the same modular plan, the Cardo and Decumanus crossing at right angles to form a perfect grid of streets and insulae or city blocks. Every insula was a multiple of the standard Roman foot, a repeatable unit of urban space. This is a profound shift in the story of measurement. The Egyptian priest used his cubit to build a gateway to the gods. The Roman engineer used his pes to build an infrastructure for conquest. One was a spiritual act, the other a political one, yet both relied on the same fundamental truth. that a shared, unwavering standard is the key to creating order from chaos. The Roman system demonstrates the sheer, pragmatic force of standardization, proving that the same principle that once raised temples to the stars could also be used to pave the way for an empire that spanned continents. Long before Rome forged its empire with the Roman foot, another standard was being cast in the cradle of civilization itself. Deep in the heart of ancient Sumer, in the sacred city of Nippur, a master craftsman carefully poured molten copper alloy into a mold, creating an object of immense power. This was the Nippur Cubit, a physical bar of metal that served as the absolute standard of length for one of the world's first great civilizations, dating to around 2,650 years before the Common Era. This artifact is one of the most profound discoveries in the history of measurement. It is a ruler quite literally frozen in time. Its length, approximately 19.5 inches, is not a random number. When you place it beside the later Egyptian Royal Cubit, the relationship is unmistakable. The two units are incredibly close, siblings separated by centuries and hundreds of miles. This simple bar of metal raises a staggering possibility. Could the sophisticated measuring system of the pyramids have its roots in the mud brick cities of Mesopotamia? The existence of the Nippur Cubit tells us that the drive for perfect, standardized measurement is not a later development in human history. It is a foundational pillar as old as civilization itself. The very first time humans gathered in great cities to build temples and coordinate large societies, they realized they needed a single, unchangeable truth against which everything else could be measured. This copper bar was that truth. It was the guarantee that every builder, every surveyor, every merchant in the land of Sumer was singing from the same mathematical hymn sheet. The implications are profound. If the Sumerians were using a standardized cubit at the very dawn of recorded history, where did they get it? Was it a local invention, born from the practical needs of administering their complex irrigation canals and ziggurats? Or was the Nippur Cubit itself an inheritance, a physical copy of a standard that was already ancient when the first bricks of Nippur were laid? This artifact provides a tangible, undeniable link to the origin point of our global mystery, suggesting that the river valleys of Mesopotamia may have been the primary hub from which this sacred science of measure first began to spread across the ancient world. The vast Pacific Ocean presents the ultimate test of the ancient measuring mind. While civilizations on continents raised stones to the sky, the Polynesian voyagers used the sky itself as their monument and their map. They set sail across thousands of miles of open water in double-hulled canoes, navigating not by chance, but by a science so refined it allowed them to find specks of land in an expanse of blue. Their instrument was the entire celestial dome, memorized with the precision of a master architect's blueprint. They did not use a physical ruler, but they possessed a mental one of breathtaking accuracy. They sailed by what they called star paths, knowing that specific stars would rise and set over specific islands. A navigator would hold a destination in his mind by memorizing the succession of stars that passed over it, steering his vessel to keep the celestial compass aligned. This was a living, dynamic system of measurement where the stars were fixed points on a grand, rotating grid, but their knowledge went far beyond the stars. They learned to read the ocean itself as a text. They memorized the subtle patterns of swells, refracted and bent by unseen islands far beyond the horizon. They watched the flight paths of birds at dusk, knowing that certain species would always lead them to land. They could feel a change in the rhythm of the waves through the hull of their canoe, a tactile measurement that spoke of distant shores. This entire body of knowledge, this complex science of navigation, was preserved and passed down through an unbroken chain of oral tradition, from master navigator to apprentice. There were no stone tablets or copper bars, only the trained human memory, holding a standardized system of spatial knowledge that spanned a third of the globe. The Polynesian expansion was not a haphazard drifting. It was a deliberate, repeated act of colonization, a testament to a shared and precise understanding of time and space. They knew the rhythms of the seasons, the cycles of the winds, and the precise relationship between their position on the open ocean and the clockwork of the heavens above. This is a different expression of the very same universal impulse we saw in Egypt and Britain. The pyramid builders encoded their knowledge of the earth into stone. The Polynesian voyagers encoded theirs into song, story, and the very feel of the sea. One culture built temples anchored to the earth, the other built a seafaring tradition that conquered the planet's greatest ocean. Both were using a form of sacred measurement to navigate reality, one looking to the horizon, the other to the endless sea, but both guided by the same eternal mathematical stars. While empires fell and libraries burned, the flame of this ancient knowledge did not go out. It was kept alive in the secluded lodges of the medieval stonemasons. These guilds were far more than simple trade unions. They were secretive brotherhoods, the sole guardians of architectural geometry throughout Europe's so-called Dark Ages. Their initiation rites and cryptic symbols were not mere superstition. They were a method of safeguarding a priceless inheritance, the very same principles of ratio and proportion that had once raised the pyramids and Stonehenge. The master mason's true secret was his ability to generate complex structures from a few simple geometric operations, using only a compass and a straight edge. He knew that within a circle he could find the square, the triangle, and the pentagon, and that the relationships between these shapes held the key to stable and sacred architecture. This was their protected tradecraft, passed from master to apprentice in a carefully controlled oral tradition, ensuring the knowledge survived without ever being written down for their rivals to steal. This living chain of wisdom found its ultimate expression in the great Gothic cathedrals. At a place like Chartres, every stone speaks this silent geometric language. The cathedral's soaring height, its delicate stained glass windows, and the seemingly impossible lightness of its flying buttresses were all calculated achievements. The floor plan is a complex tapestry of squares and circles, its proportions governed by the same irrational numbers that fascinated the Greeks. The width of the nave relates to the height of the vault by the square root of 2. The rose windows are perfect mandalas of geometric harmony, their tracery generated from overlapping circles. The entire structure is a symphony in stone, composed using the same mathematical scales as the Parthenon, yet achieving a completely different aesthetic. These cathedrals did not simply appear. They were the product of a continuous lineage, a direct thread connecting the anonymous masters of Chartres and Notre Dame back through time to the architects of the Roman aqueducts and ultimately to the first geometers who measured the earth. The guilds were the crucial bridge, the human network that carried the torch through a millennium of upheaval, preserving the universal language of measure until it was ready to be rediscovered by the thinkers of the Renaissance. The medieval mason's compass and the Roman surveyor's rod would eventually be set aside for a new kind of ruler, one born not from tradition but from pure reason. The scientific revolution ignited a profound paradigm shift in how humanity perceived the universe, and this new world demanded a new language of measure. Scholars and philosophers began to see the old units, the foot and the cubit and the inch, as chaotic relics of a superstitious past. These measures were tied to the human body, a king's forearm or a farmer's footstep, or they were woven into the symbolic fabric of a sacred cosmos. They were seen as arbitrary, local, and imprecise, ill-suited for the new clockwork universe that science was revealing. The dream emerged for a single, universal standard, derived not from man but from nature itself, and expressed in the clean, logical language of base 10. This dream reached its climax in the ferment of the French Revolution. In a stunning act of political and scientific will, the revolutionaries sought to wipe the slate of history clean, to rebuild society from its foundations, and that included its units of measurement. They commissioned the finest scientific minds to create a system that was, in their own words, for all people for all time. Their solution was breathtaking in its simplicity and its ambition. They would derive their new standard from the Earth. A team of surveyors undertook the perilous task of measuring a meridian arc from Dunkirk to Barcelona, a fraction of the planet's total circumference. From this immense planetary measurement, they defined the meter as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator. It was a triumphant return to the geodetic principle, a direct echo of the ancient impulse that had defined the Royal Cubit and the megalithic yard millennia before. The great irony, however, is that in this act of rediscovery, something fundamental was lost. The meter was a brilliant abstraction, a decimal unit for a rational age. But it was stripped of its symbolic soul. The old cubit was not just a length, it was 7 palms, echoing the 7 classical planets. The megalithic yard was not just a number, it was the key to predicting eclipses. These ancient measures were part of an integrated philosophy, a system where number, geometry, and cosmology were inseparable. The new metric system was designed to be philosophically neutral, a blank slate for calculation. It was a tool of the intellect, but it no longer spoke of the stars, the seasons, or the human body. It marked the end of an era, the final chapter in the long history of secret, sacred measures. The universal standard was no longer a mystery guarded by master masons, but a public fact, engraved on a platinum bar and stored in a vault. Humanity had gained a perfect tool for global commerce and science, but it had quietly closed the door on a world where every measurement was a silent prayer, a tiny fragment of a cosmic order. The secrets of the ancient builders did not give up their mysteries easily. For centuries, their monuments stood as silent, enigmatic puzzles, until a new generation of investigators arrived with tape measures, theodolites, and an open mind. These were not treasure hunters, but dedicated researchers who believed the stones themselves held a message, if only one knew how to measure them correctly. The most prominent of these modern code breakers was Alexander Thom, a Scottish engineer who brought a rigorous, statistical eye to the rolling landscapes of Neolithic Europe. For decades, Thom meticulously surveyed hundreds of stone circles, from the remote Scottish Isles to the moors of England. He did not trust old sketches or approximate guesses. He took thousands of precise measurements, recording the positions and distances between stones to within a fraction of an inch. When he crunched the numbers, a stunning pattern emerged from the data. These structures were not arranged haphazardly. They were laid out using a precise, standardized unit of length, the megalithic yard, which he calculated to be 2.72 feet. Thom's engineering background allowed him to see what archaeologists had missed, the ghost of a master builder's measuring rod, preserved in the positions of stones that had stood for 5,000 years. Across the Atlantic, another brilliant mind was tackling the same mystery from a different angle. Livio Catulo Stecchini, a professor of ancient history, immersed himself in the metrology of the classical world and beyond. While Thom was measuring fields, Stecchini was buried in ancient texts and temple dimensions, performing complex mathematical analyses to uncover the relationships between different units of measure. He painstakingly demonstrated how the Egyptian royal cubit, the Roman foot, and the Greek stadion were not arbitrary lengths, but were all derived from the dimensions of the Earth itself. He showed that these ancient cultures possessed a sophisticated understanding of geodesy, the science of measuring our planet, and that their sacred rulers were portable fragments of this global knowledge. The methods of these pioneers were as important as their findings. They relied on statistical analysis, cross-cultural comparison, and relentless field measurement. They were not looking for magical symbols or alien inscriptions. They were looking for consistency, for the mathematical fingerprints of a shared technical tradition. And for their efforts, they were often met with deep skepticism from the academic establishment. Their work challenged the orthodox view of prehistory, which saw ancient people as primitive and isolated. The idea of a prehistoric scientific tradition, of a unified network of builders, was too radical for many to accept. Thom and Stechini were often relegated to the fringes of their fields, their meticulous research dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Yet, stone by stone, calculation by calculation, they built an unassailable case. They proved that the greatest secret of the ancients was not hidden in a lost language or a buried scroll. It was encoded in the proportions of their monuments, a permanent record written in the universal language of mathematics, waiting centuries for someone to come along and read it. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine hardwired to find order in chaos. This very strength, however, opens us to a powerful critique from the world of academic archaeology. The central charge against the idea of a global measuring system is one of numerology, the art of finding meaningful numbers in random data. A skeptic would argue that with thousands of ancient sites and dozens of possible units, it is statistically inevitable that you will find some measurements that seem to align. If you look hard enough and are flexible enough with your definitions, you can make almost any number appear significant. The megalithic yard, for instance, was not found with perfect consistency at every site Alexander Thom surveyed. There were variations, and critics contend that by selectively choosing which sites to include and which to ignore, Thom created a statistical mirage, a pattern born from his own desire to find one. This is the trap of confirmation bias, where we unconsciously favor evidence that supports our theory and dismiss anything that contradicts it. The same flexible tape measure can be applied to the pyramids. If the base perimeter does not give you the number you want, perhaps the height will. If the height fails, maybe the diagonal of the chamber holds the key. With enough attempts, a significant number will eventually emerge from the stone, but was it placed there by the builder or by the modern interpreter seeking a secret code? Beyond the numbers lies a profound logistical problem. How could a standard as precise as the megalithic yard be transmitted across the length and breadth of Europe without a written language to define it? How could the exact length of the Northern Foot be shared between the Khmer Empire and Teotihuacan without a single shred of archaeological evidence for contact, like shared pottery styles or foreign artifacts? The transmission of such precise knowledge requires more than a chance encounter. It demands a sustained, organized effort of teaching, a school of master masons for which we have no historical record. The skeptics propose a simpler, more human explanation. Great minds facing similar challenges, like moving massive stones or aligning buildings to the sun, will naturally converge on similar mathematical solutions. The right-angle triangle, the circle, and the fundamental ratios they contain are not secrets to be discovered, but universal truths to be independently uncovered by any culture with a keen eye and a practical need. In this view, the ancient world was not a single network, but a constellation of isolated genius, each culture independently hearing the same faint, mathematical whisper from the universe. This debate is not a simple clash of fact versus fiction, but a fundamental disagreement over the nature of human ingenuity and the limits of coincidence. It forces us to ask a difficult question of ourselves. When we look at these ancient stones, are we seeing the ghost of a lost global civilization, or are we seeing the reflection of our own powerful and sometimes overactive desire to connect the dots? That ancient Roman foot stamped out in bronze to govern an empire never truly vanished. It evolved, shifting slightly over centuries of use to become the foundation of the British imperial system. The modern foot we use today is a direct living descendant of the Roman pes, a unit of measure that once dictated the width of a legionary's trench now determines the size of a sheet of plywood. This is not an isolated relic. Across Europe, many architects and carpenters still use a metric foot of 30 centimeters, a clean, modern number that is hauntingly close to its ancient Roman predecessor. It seems the old standards possess a stubborn inertia, resisting total erasure even by the clean logic of the metric system, but the survival is more profound than just similar lengths. The very proportions those ancient builders held sacred continue to whisper to us, guiding our hands and our aesthetics often without our conscious knowledge. The iconic front face of the Parthenon fits perfectly within a golden rectangle, and so does the facade of the United Nations Secretariat building in New York. The spirals of a nautilus shell and the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower follow the golden ratio, and this same pattern feels instinctively right to a modern architect laying out the proportions of a room or the elevation of a skyscraper. We are drawn to these forms not because we have calculated them, but because they echo a fundamental harmony found throughout nature, a harmony our ancestors first codified into their sacred measures. This is the silent, enduring legacy of the master builders. Their greatest monuments are not just the pyramids and stone circles that captivate us. Their true masterpiece is the invisible scaffold of geometry they embedded deep within human consciousness. Every time a modern builder instinctively chooses a proportion that feels balanced, or a city planner lays out a street grid that just works, they are tapping into that ancient, universal wellspring. The forgotten unity of the ancient world did not shatter. It simply went underground, flowing like a hidden river beneath the landscape of history, emerging today in the shapes of our homes, our monuments, and the very world we continue to build. From the Great Pyramid's encoded perimeter to Stonehenge's celestial calculator, a single thread connects them all. We have traveled across continents and millennia, from the Indus Valley's standardized bricks to the Polynesian star paths, and a stunning picture has emerged from the silent stones. Our ancestors were not isolated primitives, each struggling alone in the dark. They were active participants in a vast, interconnected network of knowledge, a global fraternity of master builders who shared a common language written not in words but in measure. These secret systems were far more than simple tools for construction. They were a profound language, a way of expressing a unified vision of the cosmos where heaven, earth, and humanity were inextricably bound together by the immutable laws of number and geometry. The Royal Cubit was a slice of the earth, the megalithic yard a beat of the celestial clock, and the golden ratio the signature of life itself. This was not mere technology. It was a spiritual and scientific philosophy, a way of seeing the universe as an ordered, harmonious whole, and then building that order into the very fabric of their world. The debate over its origins will undoubtedly continue, with compelling arguments on both sides. Yet the sheer weight of the evidence, the precise recurrence of these mathematical constants across impossible distances, compels us to expand our understanding of human history. Whether this points to a single, lost global civilization fragmented by a great cataclysm, or to a simultaneous intellectual awakening in distant lands, the outcome is the same. The stones themselves tell a story of a forgotten unity, a time when the world's first architects were all reading from the same cosmic blueprint. Let this enduring mystery inspire you to look at the ancient world with new eyes, to see the Great Pyramid not just as a tomb, but as a textbook, and Stonehenge not as a primitive calendar, but as a sophisticated observatory. The silent conversation of the stones is not over. It is an invitation for us to join in, to question, and to wonder. What does this hidden connectedness mean for your understanding of our shared past? We would be fascinated to hear your own thoughts on this profound puzzle in the comments below.